Hello and welcome to the Airline Weekly Lounge. I'm your host Gordon Smith and I'm joined as usual by Jay Shabbat. In part 1, we're talking all things Icelandair, and in part 2, we crunch the latest capacity numbers and reveal the big airport winners and losers. Hi Jay, how's it going?
All right. Still cold here in the Northeast, but getting a little bit better today. It's Tuesday morning.
Tell you where it's usually warm, Las Vegas. Not always though. I did go there in November, many years ago, and it was snowing on our Grand Canyon tour. I didn't get to see a thing. So I kind of feel like, I was like, have you been to the Grand Canyon? I have, but I haven't really. I saw the IMAX Center. I saw the inside of the visitor sort of gift shop, and that was pretty much it. I looked out into the great abyss, and it was just a fog of snowy whiteness. So maybe, Jay, who knows? Well, one day we'll get around to Las Vegas. And Las Vegas, not as a spoiler for part 2, but I dare say we might have a little something involving that Nevada city in part 2 of our show. But part 1, we're talking about Icelandair. That's right.
Some long time Airline Weekly readers, very long time. You maybe remember years ago, we used to call Icelandair the cold weather Copa. And we did that because Panama City is, if you think about it, just an ideal hub between North America and South America based on the geography of Panama. Well, Iceland is kind of equally ideal, an ideally located hub for connections between North America and Europe. So they're kind of, positioned right in between two giant markets. Same way Panama, same way Reykjavik is kind of the same. However, I'm going to stop using that analogy because in one sense, it's very misleading. Copa, as many of you know, is one of the world's most profitable airlines and has been for many decades now, whereas Icelandair very much isn't. And that is a good segue into discussing the numbers that they reported this week. Icelandair lost money. It's at a negative $17 million operating loss, which translated to a negative 1% operating margin. So it was only negative 1%, but it's still a red number is never a good thing. What is going on here? Well, we can talk, in very broad and general terms that Icelandair does face a very difficult competitive environment. It is challenging running an airline, even with a good hub, a well-located hub, when you're competing against, think about all of the carriers that fly between North America and Europe. I mean, you've got your US big three, you've got the Canadian carriers, you've got all your, European carriers that fly transatlantically. So it is, and they've traditionally had a lower cost base than most of these rivals that I mentioned, but Icelandair is not exactly a very low cost place to do business. So they're able to get by, and you can go back, historically they've had years when they've done decently well, but something's not working right now. It's not, they're not able to make the model work. And again, this is not, it's not that they're in danger of going out of business, or they're not posting Spirit like, negative margins or anything. But the point is that, they're losing money.
They're losing money. I was just going to say, never nice to see a bit of red ink spill, especially looking at those annual numbers, Jay. Let's drill into it in a little bit of detail. We're looking at currency issues here, cost issues. What are the factors at play?
Yeah. So let's go into some of the more specific factors that they're talking about right now going, as we're starting 2026 here, going into getting close to the spring. It won't be too long now until the spring season when things start to pick up. And of course, summer is when the transatlantic market really peaks, although it's been peaking a little bit further deeper into the fall now as well. But so we're getting into that spring period. A couple problems on the revenue side, and then we'll talk about the cost side. So they did say that the weaker US dollar is definitely impacting demand from the US to both Iceland and to Europe via Iceland. So they're definitely losing some of that business because of the currency. They were very clear about that. They also talked about softer demand from Europe to the US, even though you might say, well, if the currency is, weak in the US, won't more Europeans go? But we kind of know what's happening with US tourism right now. Fewer people are traveling for reputational reasons, whatever you want to, however you want to describe that. But they did definitely mention that. On the other hand, there was some good news on the revenue side, or demand/revenue side. The revenues are actually holding up better than the traffic numbers might suggest. And that's because, surprise, surprise, premium is doing really well.
Ding, ding, ding.
Yeah, if that's, if I had a nickel for every time I said that. The Saga class is their premium product, and that still continues to sell very well. So they actually, over last year, they grew their revenues 11%. So the double digit, this is not a question of, shrinking because their demand is going away. I mean, they're still able to grow their revenues, but again, they're getting it on the premium side. And then let's also keep in mind, something like 13-14% of their total revenues come from cargo and aircraft leasing. And they said those businesses are doing pretty well also. So now switching over to the cost, they definitely have cost problems. They were very, open about that. They said, labor costs are just increasing. I believe they used the word, unsustainably. And they have a new round of labor negotiations coming up. So that always gets a little bit precarious. They talked about emissions costs, having to purchase carbon credits, having to use sustainable aviation fuel. Some of those environmental related costs have been going up a lot. And then, of course, they did mention the exchange rate. Now, usually when you have a weaker US dollar, that's often a good thing for cost, because if your currency is stronger, then you're purchasing those dollar-based, your dollar-based costs like aircraft and fuel usually, would get cheaper. And that's true, but Iceland has a lot of their costs in the local currency because of just the labor that's based there. So they did say that the dollar depreciation is actually a headwind on costs, not a tailwind. And then keep in mind also that because they fly the US is just their biggest market. So they're collecting a lot of their dollars in revenues. So it's never good when you're collecting money that depreciates, right? So they're not happy about the weaker dollar. So, and then, as we said before, it's fewer Americans are visiting because of it, because it's just more expensive to visit. So yeah, that's a little bit about some of their revenue problems and their cost problems going into 2026 or going into the peak season 2026.
Thanks for that, Jay. Interesting you mentioned Saga Premium as their high-end product. It definitely isn't business class in the traditional sense. You're not looking at lie-flat beds. You're not looking at all the bells and whistles that you would expect on a flag carrier crossing the Atlantic. This is much closer to a premium economy product. And I still think, anecdotally, I've had people in my network who have traveled expecting the bells and whistles, and they said, it's very comfortable and it was much better than economy, but maybe a little bit of a knowledge gap between what the expectation is versus the reality there in Saga Premium. But interesting to hear that it's still popular, although you wonder how many of those are first timers expecting it to be a really, really nice product, and they're finding themselves in a sort of dentist chair. Anyway,
maybe they'll call it dental class. Some airline will come up with that.
Guaranteed to make you smile.
I'm sure that'll see. Hey, that's a great tagline there.
Oh, I'm in the wrong business.
Yeah.
But on the handful of occasions I've flown Icelandair, just to Iceland, I haven't done the full transatlantic thing. The crew have been absolutely outstanding, from the most junior staffer right up until the senior person, everyone in between. You do genuinely get the impression that, this is an airline that people are very happy to work for. And, the cynic might argue Iceland has got a population of just around 400,000. And obviously this is not an airline that is just serving the local population, as we've already suggested. You've got the inbound tourism and you've got the transit traffic through as well. But I can't imagine, if you do want to live in Iceland and you want to be cabin crew or pilot or anyone else for that matter, that you're going to be working for anyone but Icelandair, especially with Play and previously WOW out of the picture, Jay. Just to that point, was there any sort of indication around the competitive landscape and how that's changed specifically around other Icelandic carriers, namely Play? They obviously left the market at the end of last year. Any sort of indication that there's been a positive uptick for Icelandair?
Yeah, well, you have to, when I mentioned that their revenues grew 11% last year, that's a full year number. But for sure, Play the demise of play at the end of last year I think it was September, October. Those last couple months, definitely, that was certainly helpful, just as the disappearance of WoW was in 2019 or whenever that was. And in fact, if you look at just the Q4 numbers, I don't think I mentioned them before, but Icelandair actually did improve year over year in the fourth quarter. So the numbers, they're still red numbers. I mean, this is the winter quarter after all, -8%. And then last year was -9%. So probably, play disappearing had something to do with, the year-over-year improvement. That, and as I mentioned before, the transatlantic peak season does seem to be kind of pushing into that fall season, to that Q4. So that is probably helped them as well. And then if you look around, competitively, it's a European and North American market. I mean, you're not really going to get any carriers from other regions flying to Iceland. So on the US side, you do have United and Delta. They're in the market, and they serve a couple of different cities to Iceland. I want to say off the top of my head that Delta flies from New York and Minneapolis and maybe Atlanta. Can't remember. United does a few different cities as well. American is not in the market. I think they once flew to Iceland, but they're not in the market now. I mean, some of it is it's a market that you can't fly 777 there. It's too big, So if you look at United and Delta, they'll fly like 757s, maybe a few 767s mixed in. That's one, limiting factor. You don't really even see, I don't think, too many 787s in that market. It might not be any as far as I know. Unless Alaska is now flying to Iceland. I presume they're using the 787, although it might be a 330. I don't know off the top of my head. We can cheat. We can look here and see what is Alaska flying to Iceland.
Yeah, I'm not sure that route started yet. I think that's still to come this coming season.
Oh, I got thrown a curveball there. It's actually the MAX 8. They can do that all the way from, looks like they can do it seems like a longer distance than it is Seattle to Reykjavik, but just because they're Seattle's so far north, and it's because of the way the circumference of the Earth, you can actually do a MAX 8. So there you go.
Whether you'd want to is another question, but
yeah, in dental class. Well, we won't talk about consumer preferences now. We'll just we'll settle on just being fascinated here that they can do an narrow body, which is kind of cool. And then of course, Icelandair itself it's all 757s for many years, a few 767s mixed in. The 76 is a wide body, of course, and now they're transitioning to Maxes and to A321s. They're going to get the LRs pretty soon, I think by this summer. And then they have XLRs on order as well, but they're not coming until 2029. So that's a ways off. Those will for sure enable some more US routes. They already go pretty deep into the US with narrow bodies. I mean, we talked about, I think a few episodes ago, Gordon, remember we talked about Nashville?
I do. Yeah, they got the Southwest partnership.
Yeah, that's right. So they have that, and they kind of hit a lot of Pittsburgh, some of these secondary markets. So it's a good way, sure, if you live in New York City or Boston or some big city with a ton of European service, you can use Iceland, but it's going to be, you have a lot of options. But for a place like Pittsburgh or Nashville, it really is Icelandair is a great option, because there's just not, you're going to have to connect somewhere probably. There are very few other alternatives. So you can presume that they get, pretty good yields on a route like that.
Absolutely.
I mean, assuming the demand is there, that's the other side of the coin there, is that, is there enough demand to fill the plane? And, it's a little bit of how they think about these US routes. But sure, expect more as some of these longer range planes arrive.
Absolutely. I always think you have to have a secondary city on at least one side for this to make sense as not to go down the consumer pathway again. But if you're living in London and you want to get to New York, it makes absolutely no sense to mess around in Reykjavik. Never mind everything around loyalty and alliance and options and everything else there. But if you're in, let's say, Glasgow, Scotland, and you don't have a non-stop link, or at least a year-round non-stop link to New York, let alone Nashville, Pittsburgh, that's where this really does come into play, because you're going to be changing somewhere. And I would personally far rather, again, using that Glasgow, Scotland example, get my journey off in the right direction. I don't want to be backtracking hundreds of miles south to Heathrow or even to Schiphol or Charles de Gaulle and then find 4 hours later I'm flying right over Scotland again to get to North America. If I can start my journey, head over the Atlantic, I feel like I'm making some good headway. And then, like we said, you're going to be changing somewhere. Reykjavik's not a bad place to do it. We haven't discussed North Atlantic. That's the other sort of, they're not as big as they used to be. They're doing a lot of charter stuff. They've obviously got the Indigo wet lease as well, doing charters, I think, for P&O Cruises in the UK, doing stuff from the likes of Manchester over to the Caribbean to pick up cruise traffic there. But North still with a sort of fledgling Atlantic offering there for the very, very price-conscious consumer. I saw some one-way fares online, Jay, going from Orlando, Florida, across to the UK. And it wasn't even sort of the depths of January or something. It was sort of, Easter holiday sort of time, and it was from 109 US one way. And we've discussed this before. What sounds like a great fare for Joe Public as the consumer usually rings alarm bells for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the alarm bells were going off there in my head. When you see prices that low, you wonder if you're just they're desperate to still fill seats. But
yeah, a bit of a fire sale.
In the North Atlantic example, as you mentioned, they're kind of moving over to that charter model now more because they realize the schedule service is just very difficult. The old Norwegian found that out the hard way. Flying those transatlantic routes from London and Oslo and.
You're going to make me, I'm falling into the Norwegian trap again. We're going to mention Argentina. I'm not going to do it. Otherwise we're going to be here for another 10 minutes discussing the pros and cons of starting a low-cost carrier in Argentina. That is
You didn't think that was a good idea? It was maybe just a little ahead of its time starting a low-cost carrier in Argentina?
I am not falling down for this trap, Jay.
Trying to bait you there.
No. This will be an hour-long podcast otherwise. Go into the Airline Weekly Lounge archives if you want to hear Jay and I's perspectives on the pros and cons of Norwegian serving the Argentine market back in 2018-19, I think that was. Anyway, anything else you want to mention on Icelandair? We'll have a little bit more detail in this week's issue.
Yeah, I want to say you made a great point about the market like Glasgow is perfect for what Icelandair can do for you as far as give you a convenient attractively priced connection. You set something off in my head. I was thinking about how when you are flying from a secondary city to another secondary city on another continent, that gets very interesting too. So let's say you need to fly from Glasgow to maybe even someplace smaller than Pittsburgh, Huntsville, Alabama, just for example, Glasgow to Huntsville. And people have to do that. Huntsville is a big, they have, it's a big space economy there. They have like rocket companies and stuff. So there's, you'd be surprised what people have to do. And that's where the alliances, the joint ventures come in. That they do, that's what they do really well. So if you're, Air France, KLM, and Delta, or throw Virgin Atlantic in the mix there, or United, Lufthansa, American, British Airways, they just have so many different options of you can literally get anywhere to anywhere because of just by double connecting, and through the sometimes single connecting. But the point is they have just multiple hubs throughout both continents and get you anywhere. Regional networks. I didn't want to take this conversation back to Copa, but if you think about what they do really, really, really well is take people from places like, Guatemala doesn't have so much service to Salvador, Brazil, or Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. That's what they do really, really well, connect people in places or between points that are, otherwise don't have so much service. Okay. Well, I went off on a tangent there. Sorry. We never go off on
That's not like you, Jay.
Yeah, it's not like me. All right. Let me return to what airline were we talking about again? Oh yeah. Icelandair.
That's the
one. You said it, not me, but dental class. They're
going to be burning effigies of me in the streets of Reykjavik tonight.
Yeah, well, they're going to get the last laugh here because they said that Saga class is actually performing very well. And we joke, I'm sure it is a very good product. I think you said some of your colleagues have flown it and found it to be good. I know I have people that I know have flown Saga class and found it to be a very good value as well. So All right. See that? I made up for your insult there. But
Looking out for
we'll
me.
see. We'll see that what kind of hate mail we get from Iceland. No, I did want to, and let's take it back to be serious for a moment. Just want to give you what's looking ahead to 2026. What's going on for Icelandair? They still remain confident that 2026 they're going to be able to, finally break that profitless streak, make some money this year. They are undertaking a lot of restructuring efforts, cutting costs in this way and that way. They do have a couple of new routes coming. Nothing new announced for the U.S. Yet for this summer, but they do have 3 European markets. Faro, you may have heard of that in a country called Portugal. You also may have heard of. They're also going to fly to Venice, and they're going to do Gdansk in Poland. So kind of staying, within Europe. And overall, they only plan to increase capacity 2% this year. It's going to be a little bit more on the conservative side. Maybe play more for yields. And they did say that January, the numbers are in, and quote unquote, the January numbers showing quote unquote, very promising start to the year. Demand remains strong on the to and from markets. That means, directly to Iceland and from Iceland. And then they're also seeing some good load factors and yields overall. So that presumably means the connecting stuff as well. I think that's all I've got. Oh no, one more thing that I will say about Icelandair is that they are aggressively pursuing partnerships. You already brought one important one up in Southwest. Turkish Airlines is another one that comes to mind, where they're trying to get more people to come to Iceland from, let's say, the Middle East, Turkey, Africa, and Turkish Airlines is able to help in that regard. That's all I got on Icelandair.
And thank you, Jay. Before I have any angry Swedes taking to the post bag as well, we should say that United Airlines announced the restart of their service from Glasgow to New York, Newark. And there was a press release going through my inbox just earlier in the week. They are actually increasing it 22%, they say, in available seats, summer 2026. That's going to be flying from Glasgow to Newark. So there we go. It will be the only non-stop service between Glasgow and the US.
Great.
Still plenty of money on the table and options for Icelandair there. I don't think they're going to be too worried by that.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That's a sign that market probably is doing pretty well.
Yeah, I always feel sorry because they've got Edinburgh just down the road and that's stealing everything. You got American taking even the XLR across there. But that is for another day, Jay, another discussion. But notably, the United route to Glasgow, that's going to be on a MAX 8 as well. So just showing that these narrow bodies with more efficient engines are really proving their worth. Right. So much more we could discuss, more detail on Icelandair in the next issue of Airline Weekly. Before we go into the break, a quick reminder to send any questions or comments, please no hate mail, to us at podcasts@skift.com. That's podcast with an S at the end.
Send it Gordon, not me.
I'm not giving out no personal email addresses. Podcasts@skift.com. Nice and generic. Also, please don't forget to follow or subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening or watching. And if you are enjoying the show, please rate us 5 stars or leave us a positive review so we can continue to spread the word about the Airline Weekly Lounge. Don't go anywhere. We're going to be talking airport capacity trends in part 2. Hello and welcome back to the Airline Weekly Lounge. I'm Gordon Smith, joined as usual by co-host Jay Shabbat. Part 1, we were discussing Icelandair, plus almost about 15 other topics. It was incredible how you can just start with just one airline and it just sort of expands into literally dozens of others, Jay. Part 2, we are going to take a look at some of the latest capacity trend data for global airports. And before we get into the nitty-gritty of the conversation, Jay, just for our audience, set the parameters of how we have, firstly the methodology of the data source, but also just how we've come to this set of numbers.
Sure. So this is all the numbers that we're going to present here are using Cirium DOME, the data company. And what I did was I ran for the second quarter all the airports in the world with commercial air service. And I kind of chopped off everything but the top 50. So the 50 largest. So if you think about, Atlanta, number 1, Dubai, and, Chicago, whatever, all the top ones. So the top 50. And then I looked year over year, again, the second quarter, second quarter, and ranked them. Which ones are growing the fastest? Which ones are shrinking? So we have that list compiled and we can go through them a little bit.
Sounds good.
Yeah, we can start with again, of those top 50, what's going to be the fastest growing market and fastest growing airport in the second quarter? And the answer is...
We still don't have the budget for a drum roll, Jay. You're going to have to make it up yourself.
You could do it with your pen or something, your pen and pencil. Right?
I would need at least 2 pens to do that.
We don't have the budget for one.
Yeah, just the one. We Jay, little known fact, Jay and I actually share a pen. We send it across the Atlantic each week.
Virtually, yeah.
It's my week for the pen. All right, Jay, put us out of our misery.
Okay, yeah. So I will do the honors here. It is Chicago O'Hare. And I think that some of our listeners, particularly those in the US, are not going to be surprised by this. We all know about the war that's underway now between American and United at O'Hare. Both are big hub carriers there. And American is really trying to build that hub back up to where it was, pre-COVID. So they've added a lot of new service. And then United, in turn, has retaliated with a lot of new service of their own. And they've also, American acquired some gates from Spirit, and more recently, United is going to acquire some gates from Spirit. But if you look at, United and American, year over year, their seat counts for Q2, both up 21%. So a ton of growth there. You have to believe that's going to put a lot of pressure on their Chicago margins. United will argue that, we might get a little bit, but we are we're the dominant player here, and we're not seeing too much share shift, and we're doing fine. American, also kind of says, oh, well, this is an investment. It's we're gonna make money here eventually. Well, I don't want to put words in their mouth. I didn't quite say that. I don't think they admit that they didn't specifically say they're losing money now or anything one way or another, but you have to believe, it is kind of messy for them, Chicago O'Hare at this point. And then, you don't know how long can they continue like this. Will American just, stick to their guns, or at some point will they eventually, say, look, we can't sustain these kind of what I'm presuming to be losses and pull out. And, the other option is that they really do just, make a lot of improvements and attract more passengers and steal some share from United. But based on what we know about consumer sentiment, United versus American now, I think that's going to be tough to do. I mean, United is just seems to be very entrenched there and doing very well there and very well liked there. So that's, Chicago battle. Don't forget about Southwest either. They are, they have one of their biggest operations down the road south of the city at Midway Airport. So yes, to a certain extent, it's serving a little bit of a different market, but Chicago, Chicago. So they are certainly feeling that as well.
Caught in the crosshairs. There's your issue title for next week. And just whilst we've been on air, Jay, received notification from American. Speaking just about to your point to Chicago expansion, American is investing in a new Admirals Club at O'Hare. So that's never cheap. Doing anything airside is never cheap. So clearly another indication they're spending more than 10,000 square feet. The new lounge will eventually replace the existing lounge in Concourse L.
That absolutely tells you that they are, not even remotely thinking about pulling out if they're willing to invest that kind of money. They're in for the long run. But yeah, we'll see if they can, make that work. Now, one interesting twist to this story, something that's been, becoming more of a topic recently, is that with these credit cards, these co-branded loyalty credit cards becoming so valuable to the airline, you can't ignore the fact that, the more relevant you are in Chicago, the more options you have in Chicago, the more service you have, the more credit card signups you're going to get, and that's going to make you money. So, you wouldn't invest in a hub just for that reason, but I think we're getting to the point where the numbers are so big that you can't leave that out of the conversation anymore.
Completely
and
agree.
I believe they talked about that in their last earnings call. I believe they said that their Advantage card signups in Chicago have been trending very well.
Got it. All right. So much more we could discuss in Chicago, and I dare say we will be revisiting that in a future podcast, Jay. But back to the airport capacity numbers. Who else were the notable entries there on your chart?
Yeah, I'll mention just for sake of time, we won't go into all the details of why these airports are up so much, but Bogota in Colombia, Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, Kunming in China, Newark back in the US, Jakarta, Chengdu in the new airport in China, and Hong Kong. All those airports I named are in the top 50 in terms of capacity, and they're all growing by double digits in the second quarter. And again, we could spend for hours talking about why. Bogota, I think some of that is, some new low-cost carriers. JetSmart is in the market now. Kuala Lumpur, AirAsia build up. You can go through, but we'll, I know you want to talk to me for another 2 hours, Gordon, here, but I think some of our listeners have better things to do. So why don't we go down to the losers?
Yeah, I was just going to say, tiny little side note. If I always remember the IATA code for Chengdu, because I had some amazing Chinese food, and actually some of the best dishes weren't duck or chicken or pork or beef. They were tofu based, and the airport code is TFU, and that always that just triggers a little tofu Chengdu little thing in my head. So you never have me forgetting the airport code for Chengdu.
Well, I bet you never forget the code for Nashville after I tell you that it sounds like a banana. BNA.
All right. On the losers.
All right, we could do this all day if you want as well. I mean, it's just kind of fun.
Yeah, there would be a very, very slow week in the airline business when we just go through our quickie IATA codes. But
yeah. By the way, I spent a week in Chengdu once teaching an IATA course for Sichuan Airlines. It was a really, really cool city. And have you actually been there? Did you? You said you went to.
I've been to the region, but I guess China being as big as it is, the region is fairly subjective. But had some great food, including some great Thai too.
Yeah,
some great tofu based dishes.
Definitely, yeah. Cool city too. Okay, so the bottom of the list. The very I call them losers, but that's kind of has a mean connotation. We already angered Icelandair, so I'm not going to call Las Vegas a loser, but that is the last one that's the worst one on the list. Las Vegas is actually down 7% their seats, and again, not really too huge of a surprise there. The biggest factor is Spirit just really, just pulling a tremendous amount of capacity out of there year over year. There are some other reasons too. Allegiant, which is based there, is not growing there. And if you've been, reading, I know we talked about or wrote about Allegiant in, was it our most recent issue or maybe 2 issues ago? I can't remember. But Allegiant talks about Las Vegas as a market that's kind of lost some of its luster. It used to be a superstar year-round market, and now it's, it has its peaks, but I think for reasons of affordability and for another reason I'm going to mention in a second, I think it's, like I said, lost some of its strength. There's another important reason also why Las Vegas Airport has lost quite a bit of capacity, and that's all the Canadian carriers have been just really downsizing a lot. And we kind of talked about how fewer Europeans are visiting the United States. Well, that's very, very true to an extreme when we're talking about Canadian visitors. Canada, visit to the US, way down. And if I quickly pull some numbers from Cirium DOME here, we can see WestJet as an example. Their seat counts are down 28% in Q2. And then we have Porter down 38%, and Air Canada a little bit less, only 2%. Remember, Air Canada is doing a little bit, dealing a little bit more in business traffic, which is less affected than leisure traffic. And, Vegas is not known as a business market, but there are, business convention, things like that. So they're a little bit less on the Air Canada side. But huge drops there. So for all the Southwest, by the way, we're huge in Las Vegas. They're also down a bit. So for all of those reasons, Las Vegas is at the bottom of the list here. Interestingly enough, Frontier is actually up 23%. So you can see they're, trying to find spots where others maybe, as others go away, maybe we can fill in some vacuums, capture some stuff that's getting left behind. By the way, speaking of Frontier, we are talking today on Tuesday. Frontier is actually doing their fourth quarter earnings tomorrow. That's a Wednesday for us. By the time everybody's listening to this, you'll have heard that. Could be very interesting. wonder if they say anything about the Las Vegas market. So that is Vegas. Any questions about Vegas, or did we sufficiently explain what's going on there?
Sufficient, as we would say in Portugal.
Okay. Oh, yeah. You had I forgot to ask you about your Portuguese language skills. I know you were tested this weekend.
Ask me in 7 weeks when I get the results.
Yes, we'll talk more offline about that. Okay. Other big airports that will be negative in Q2. Shenzhen, big city in China, southern China, basically on Hong Kong's doorstep. Tokyo Haneda Airport. We talked a lot about Japan last week, if you remember that. Charlotte in the US, Shanghai Pudong Airport, that's the big international facility. Jeddah, which is an interesting one. I haven't looked specifically what's going on there, but we're going to be seeing a lot of big growth in Saudi Arabia for sure in upcoming quarters. And then JFK, New York JFK here in the US is down as well. So those are your negatives. You always have to, be a little bit mindful of seasonality when you're doing quarters. With the first and second quarter switch, you do sometimes have that Easter shift can affect things a little bit. I want to say Easter is a little bit earlier this year than it was last year, but it still falls in April, which is Q2. I think you're going to get a little bit of bleed over the outbound Easter. You'll get a little bleed into Q1, but that's not really, it shouldn't, meaningfully affect an entire quarter's worth of seat capacity numbers as we're talking about now.
Thanks for crunching those numbers for us, Jay. Much appreciated. Before we go, just a quick reminder that we've got some upcoming Skift events for your diary. Go to live.skift.com for all the details. But some highlights for you. We've got the Skift India Intelligence Summit, which is March 26th in New Delhi, India. We've got the Skift Asia Forum, Bangkok, Thailand, which is April 28th. And we've got the Skift Data and AI Summit, returns to New York City on June the 3rd. Many, many more, including our Global Forum and much, much more later in the year. But they're the ones for your immediate attention. live.skift.com for all the details there. And that's also importantly where you can go if you want to read more about the Skift Idea Awards. Entries are open now for 2026. live.skift.com. Jay, thank you for that. It's a bit of a mixed session looking at airports in Iceland and everything in between. That's all we've got time for this week. Thanks to Jay for joining me, and thanks as always to our producers, John, Monica, and Will, wherever you are in the world. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time. Bye for now. Whether you're listening to us on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts, please make sure to subscribe, rate us 5 stars, or leave us a positive review. This really helps us get the word out about the Airline Weekly Lounge, so we can continue to bring you this podcast every week, absolutely free of charge. And if you're watching us on YouTube, make sure to subscribe to the Skift channel and hit the notification bell to find out whenever a new video drops.